Can we get everybody to grab a little food and get your seats? I'm not looking at you, Brooke. Wow, that was pretty good. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being out bright and early this morning and joining us. And we're excited. We have another 80 or so folks online all across the country who are also participating today. So thank you all for being interested in this topic. First and foremost, I want to thank CU Denver and the School of Public Affairs and Dean Paul Teskey for being our host this morning. Thanks, Paul. We're excited there's this much interest in this topic. We just released a case study about the creation and early development of the Luminary Learning Network, Denver Public Schools' first innovation zone. And so it's great that you're all interested in that topic. I'm Tom Goujon. I'm the president of the Gates Family Foundation. We've been around for 70 plus years. We've had a long-term focus on the quality of life for Coloradans across the whole spectrum of interests, but education being a very big part of that. And like all of you, we believe fundamentally that education just has to be the pathway for every child to have opportunity. And so that's what we get up every day and try to figure out how to support. As the largest district in the state, DPS plays a huge role in pursuing that vision. And we're lucky to have district leaders that believe in empowering and trusting visionary school leaders and teachers to create the very best learning environments they can. So there's lots of great people in this room. It's a fairly intimidating list when I looked at it. And I can't acknowledge you all, but there are some elected officials here, and I apologize. Jen, help me if I miss anybody. But Angelica Schroeder, president of the Colorado Board of Education, is with us. I think Rebecca McClellan was going to join us. There's Rebecca, also a recent Gates Fellow at the Kennedy School. Good to see you. And then we have lots of folks from Denver Public Schools. We have Ann Rowe, the current board president, Barbara O'Brien, the vice president and at-large member of the board, Angela Cobian. Is Angela here? Haven't seen her. Okay. Dr. Carrie Olson. I saw Dr. Carrie Olson right here, representing Central Denver. I think our colleague and friend Lisa Flores may be online. So if you are, Lisa, hi. I didn't see any other board members sneak in. Did anybody else show up? Good. Okay. And then we have a whole bunch of DPS leadership here. I won't name you all, but obviously Superintendent Tom Boasberg, Deputy Superintendent Susana Cordova. I saw Jen Holliday. There's lots of you. In fact, all the DPS folks, could you raise your hands just so we can acknowledge you? Thanks, guys. I didn't do that. I only clapped. I also want to say thanks to a couple of our staff because they probably won't do this themselves. First of all, Melissa Davis, wherever Melissa is, running around. She's the one who put all this together. It's her idea. She's really helped frame and shape and make the case study with Alan a really great resource. And so thank you, Melissa, for all the work on this project and also for this morning. So. And then Mary Sewell, who leads our education work, and Abby Schaller, who is running the online portion of this. Hopefully, Abby, wave your hand. These two have put a ton of effort into this concept and ultimately the formation and launching of the Luminary Learning Network. And I just want to thank both of them for the amazing contributions they've made and the many, many hours they've put into that. So thank you both. And so my last job here is to introduce Alan Gottlieb. Hi, Alan. Alan and I have known each other, 30 plus years probably. As I'm supposed to say that you've been a feature of the education landscape for decades, but that seems like not the best way to approach that. But Alan has a great perspective and has been around and in lots of different roles as a journalist, on the philanthropy side, and then as the co-founder of what started as Ed News Colorado, which became part of Chalkbeat, which continues to be a really important online source of public education information and reporting, and a resource I would imagine most of us in the room use frequently. So thank you, Alan, for all those contributions. When this all began, it was really Mary's idea that it would be interesting, whatever came of it, to have somebody sit in and try to just document the process and to think about what lessons we learn along the way. And we rarely do that. We're usually too busy just focusing on what's at hand. And so Mary was right that Alan would be perfect for that, just given his background and history and knowledge and his skills as a storyteller and a journalist. So we've been thrilled to have Alan be part of this and for Alan to author the case study. And I'm going to bring Alan over here now, and he's going to run the panel.
Hi, everybody. It is great to see such a large turnout, and I think there are almost as many people online from what I saw, so that's great. Yeah, and getting to do this case study, I had the opportunity to be a fly on the wall, which is access that a journalist working for an actual outlet would never get. I mean, I was in meetings that I wouldn't have been able to be in, so it was wonderful, and I was probably a buzzing fly around people's heads annoyingly as well as on the wall, but I did my best to be unobtrusive. But there was so much that happened in the development of the Luminary Learning Network that I tried to capture in the case study, but I think we can capture a lot of it on this panel as well. What we're going to do in the limited time we have is touch briefly on the history, how it developed, its present state, and its the future of it, and innovation zones and innovation in general in public education. All of these things carry lessons not only for Denver, and I think this is why we have a number of people on watching us from around the country, is there are real implications for this nationally as well. I wanted everybody to know that there are pieces of paper on your table. We're going to, because the panel is large and there are a lot of questions, we want questions from the audience, but we want you to write them out and then hold the slips of paper up in the air if you have, and somebody from the staff will come and pick them up, and then we will answer as many of them as we can. We just don't have time for long filibustery questions from the floor, to be honest. So, given what but we do want to definitely get some questions answered. So, with that, I'm going to start. I'm going to introduce the panel for the most part by asking them a kind of introductory question about their role in the formation of the Luminary Learning Network. I'll start with Jessica Roberts, who is the director of LLN, the executive director, and I'm actually going to defer on asking her a lot of questions because she came in the first year. And she's going to have a lot to say a little bit farther down the road. But I'm going to start with Jen Jackson, who is the principal of Cole Arts and Sciences Academy. And she was one of the 17 innovation school principals who set the wheels in motion with a letter to Superintendent Tom Boasberg formally requesting more autonomy and outlining what they would like that to look like. So, Jen, what were the main things you were seeking, and why was it so important for you to have more control over your own time in particular?
Well, I think all principals like control. It's why we're principals. But when we have gone for the level of innovation and thinking of our waivers, spend a long time crafting the language and making sure that you've argued for this, and then really getting your staff on board. So once you have these waivers, if there's no power behind them, it feels like you've spent a lot of time in a staff meeting getting very little done. And so for us, we felt like some of our waivers, it wasn't as easy to get through. And then there was sort of a shift. We had been in a group of innovation principals where we would meet all together. And there had been a shift to try to push us into different networks. One of the things that was hard is then you spend a lot of time meeting with other school principals who don't have the same level of flexibility. So, there would be something that we would have to do. And then you're kind of that principal who's in the back like that. So it was hard to keep that level of community. So that was one of the reasons we wanted to push. And then above all, we are best and most effective in our schools. That is where the power is having your leadership in the building of the students.
Thanks, Jen. Next, I will introduce Mary Sewell, who is the Senior Vice President for Education at the Gates Family Foundation. And Mary, this was in many ways her brainchild after the initial push from the principals. It represents this project, Mary, a really different level of program engagement for Gates. You and Abby Schaller, who is sitting over there, and is managing the webcast, were really involved in the creation and launch of LLN. What about the opportunity appealed to you so much, kind of in the big picture, beyond just helping 4 school leaders gain more autonomy? And what questions did you ask yourselves before jumping in and really with both feet?
Well, before she does, the other school leaders are right back there.
Ah.
So Frank Coyne and Julia and Cartal and Brent and Zach is not with us. But it is always, we rock, paper, scissors for who sits up front. But and
yeah, why don't you guys stand up?
Yeah. So it's just really important to
the
acknowledge it's always a community effort.
So three of the 4 schools are represented here. And I probably should quickly say Cole Arts and Sciences Academy, the Denver Green School, C3, and Ashley Elementary, and Zach couldn't be here today, but the other 3 schools are here. So Mary, take it away.
Sure. So, I think the reason I got involved was, I'm kind of pushy, as some of the people on the panel know.
Effective, we would call it.
That's true.
Persistent.
That's right. But because I had formerly been on the DPS board and I had such a close relationship with Tom Boasberg, who actually really mentored me in my thinking about public education in so many ways, and with Ann Rowe and other, working a lot with other people in this room, I just had a deep commitment to what DPS is extremely committed to, which is equity for all students, and really interested in if educators were actually empowered, like what systems would they create and how would they run their schools maybe differently. So it was definitely kind of birthed out of my history at DPS. And when I left the school board and started doing education work at the Gates Family Foundation, also recognizing that we were in a unique position because I was no longer on the board. I wasn't an employee of the district. I knew, many of the principals of the original 17 and felt it was a unique position to be able to come in a more advocacy type of way for the schools in a way that was, maybe at some points they could not always do. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks so much. Next, I will introduce someone who needs no introduction, Tom Boasberg, who is the superintendent of Denver Public Schools. Tom, is this 9 years now or 8? I'm sorry, 10? So not in his own age, but he's like the Methuselah of urban school superintendents. That is an unheard of tenure in this day and age for an urban school superintendent, and he's been there that long for good reason. Tom, DPS has a strong reputation for school-based decision making. Yet creating an innovation zone is another level of autonomy altogether than what you've done before. What were your initial thoughts when the 17 school leaders came to you? How did that evolve as the idea for the innovation zone gained momentum and then became a reality, especially since you were out of the country on sabbatical during some of the key and critical conversations?
Sure. A lot of layers to that. First of all, I'm thrilled to be here, and it was great to have this discussion and this level of interest, and just tremendous credit to the work that our school leaders have done, that Mary and her team, Jess, that now you're leading. And I think a lot of this work is just so thought-provoking. Just been very, very excited to be part of this development, this innovation. Lots of learning that we've done, lots of learning to be done. But I think, so a couple thoughts. So one, in my time here, just had a couple fundamental deep beliefs about how we try and improve education for our kids, and particularly for our highest needs kids. And that innovation needed, and it needs to be at the center of that work. That I think it starts with a fundamental belief that tremendously appreciate the work that folks do. Folks work incredibly hard. The status quo is not good enough, right? It's not working well enough. So I think my job as superintendent, our job is not to say, cruise control, we're good, right? Let's just make sure we implement better. No, we've got to be willing to challenge ourselves. We've got to be willing to change. We've got to be willing to innovate and find new and better ways. And I think above all, those innovations need to be around how do we attract and keep the most talented educators, teachers, school leaders, an incredibly challenging profession. And how do you find the best possible structures to develop and share learning, right? The work is really complex. It's really hard, and the level of skill needed is incredibly high. So I think those are the underpinnings. And I think, when I think back, this is now about 2.5 years ago, we're at an interesting junction point. When we helped draft the Innovation Schools Act 10 years ago. We've had by far the most innovation schools in the states. It's something we believe incredibly deeply in. And when our innovation schools started, some were in networks with other schools, but some also wanted to come together to learn and grow as innovation schools. And the original concept was that we'd have our innovation schools and innovation networks for 3 years. And then we'd keep cycling new innovation schools into those innovation networks. They'd be sort of an incubation place. But then after 3 years, our innovation schools would cycle back out and be with non-innovation schools. And the real purpose of that was to try and say, how do you get the best of both worlds of innovation, which is the space and autonomy to experiment and develop and grow, and at the same time make sure that some of those innovations and new learnings didn't sit out there in an isolated quarantine piece, right? Because part of what we want to do is when folks are developing great ideas is not have them be in 1 or 2 schools, but to allow them to learn and grow, and when they're good ideas, to really spread. And I think we had a really interesting juncture at that point 3 years ago when we said, okay, 3 years, right? It's time for new folks cycle in. Some of the folks have been there 3 years to cycle out. And some of the folks said, great, really excited about that. Some of the folks said, we're not excited about that. And it led to some really important conversations, right, about that balance. And some of you guys, we spent a lot of time sort of looking at innovation studies and a lot of time studying and working with Michael Tushman, who's the lead innovation professor, Harvard Business School. I think it's not coincidental that the one case he's written on the public sector has been on the Denver public schools. But it also, the case points out a lot of these tensions. And I think that was a moment 3 years ago where we really sort of brought some of those tensions up. And obviously, I don't want to fast forward into you're still at one point in the story. But then I think, really thanks to, I think, just some incredible vision and courage and of our school leaders and with help of Mary and others, I think really moved the ball forward. And we'll come to that part of the story.
Great,
but
thanks.
To be fair, in that, just to jump in, Tom had 9 meetings with an increasingly shrinking group of principals. So there was 17, then there was like 11, then there was 9. Then there was 4 after hours at a bar where we were like, we put a wager on what he was going to order, And then that was the point where we're like, we're really going to bring this forward. But to say an incredibly busy superintendent took that amazing amount of time to meet with all of us as that group got smaller. Like there's a point where there was just 4 and he could have been like, yeah, no, guys. But he did continue to meet with us, which is one of the reasons that this can happen in Denver and would be hard in other districts because you do have to have the kind of leadership who will meet with just 4 really annoying principals and say, yes, I hear you, continue to say no.
Just a quick second question to Tom. In the report, in this case study, refer to a degree of friction that took place during the often difficult process of negotiations in creating something new. What perspectives, hopes, fears, belief systems were shared, do you feel, and which were kind of the sticking points between the district and the leaders and Gates?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think the basic concept we got to actually pretty quickly, right? Which was this notion of an innovation zone, and that zone would have a nonprofit, 501c3, completely independent board of governors, and those principals would be responsible to that board of governors. The schools. The educators would remain DPS employees. I think that was an important part of what the principals, proposed. And so I actually think the basic outlines, the basic structure were really easy. Well, not really. I mean, they took some thought. But I really think that, we
remember, you were in Argentina.
That was before I left. And I actually think that part was easy. Not easy, but I think it really I think we came to some pretty fundamental understandings very, again, it's really the work that Jen and Zach and Julie and Frank and Mary drove, and the thinking that they drove I think it was part of the Genius of the Innovation Schools Act that allowed this, to happen. And when we helped draft it, we didn't have any idea what a zone was 10 years ago. But we remember thinking we should create this opportunity, not knowing what it was, and I think it was sort of fascinating. No one had really done it until 7 years later. You guys came back and said, "This is what this provision of the law means, and this is what it can create." So I think that basic concept again was pretty straightforward. I think the mechanics of how to is a hybrid model, right? Because in some ways we have a very clear model around charters, which are in many ways completely autonomous. Board of governors, employees are employees of the organization, completely separate, finances, academic programs, et cetera, human resources, et cetera. But obviously, there's some significant, very close collaboration, systemic collaboration between district-run schools and charters around enrollment, around use of facilities, around boundaries, around special education, around transportation. There are really important things. But this was going to be even much more of a hybrid, where the schools, in some ways, were going to be very, autonomous and separate, but in some ways really linked in to things like our human resources systems, our payroll systems, and trying to find this hybrid where there were certain aspects where the relationship was going to look exactly like charters, certain aspects where it was going to look exactly like district-run schools, and certain aspects where we had to completely create this brand new hybrid of what that was going to look like. And that took a lot of time and discussion about what that hybrid should look like to make sure that key sort of equity concerns were met, right? Which is we devote some of our funds to turnaround schools, right? That are highest need schools. We effectively take those funds away from non-turnaround schools so we can put more funds in turnaround schools. So if the LLN schools didn't have a turnaround schools, should they get that money that would otherwise go to turnaround schools, or should that money still go to turnaround schools? Not easy answers to some of these really important questions. And I think those are the kinds of things, that took a lot of discussion to really try and invent this hybrid model and what the parameter, not just the parameters, but all of the mechanics of how this hybrid model is going to operate.
Thanks, Tom. Next up is Ann Rowe, who is the president of the DPS board and, like me, has been involved in education for maybe fewer, but decades as well. Ann was instrumental in working with the fledgling LLN board and teachers to help make this happen. The board as a whole played a huge role in advancing this idea back in 2015. And in December of that year, the board unanimously passed a resolution in support of the idea. At the time, you said the resolution was, quote, a strong statement that more flexibility and autonomy is the direction that we want to move. But you also acknowledged that implementing that at scale is incredibly messy. How would you say, Ann, that the role of the board and your thoughts have evolved over time?
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. So it has been a journey with the LLN, and just to give a little history from the board perspective, starting with the Denver Plan 2020, and then moving in to pursuing policy around increased flexibilities for our schools throughout the district, and really coming up with a theory of action around the idea that the school is where it happens. The school is the unit of, folks call it change, folks call it improvement. And so when these, what became 4 incredibly talented and brave leaders came forward, along with some help of some other very talented, brave leaders to really think about this, the board was really, really intrigued about the possibilities of what an innovation zone could do at the time. And particularly my colleague Barbara O'Brien and I spent a lot of time in some of these meetings and listening and talking to our colleagues about what this could mean. But it was really, in my mind, a natural evolution of innovation of what was next. What was next for us to reach our incredibly ambitious goals in the Denver Plan 2020. And we know, and Tom said it very well, that innovation drives that. And I did applaud when we said Tom had been here for 10 years. That's a really important part of this whole evolution forward, that we have been on a pathway, very difficult at times, setbacks, challenges, mistakes, right? But we have been on a pathway that is deeply committed to equity and access for all our kids, to high-quality schools that serve their needs. So we pushed hard for the innovation zone, first out of respect and excitement for the 4 schools that wanted to create this and what they could do in their schools and show us new innovations and ways to serve kids and using resources at the school site, and also supported it to see the impact and the thinking, the change thinking it would have on the district as a system. And what does it mean to have a central system moving towards greater autonomy at the school level? What systems change? What structural change? What innovations do you actually need at the district level to empower these more autonomous systems? And so the idea of challenging ourselves, the district, to think differently about our role going forward was as much a reason why I pushed for this very strongly as did my colleagues. And so for the good or bad, I think I was very accurate on the messy part of all of this. It's been challenging. It has been challenging both from the 4 schools and what they were hoping to do, and yet we heard from them last Thursday that their environments are actually achieving the kinds of culture that they were hoping for. We heard from teachers who have felt more engaged in what's happening in their schools than ever before. And so that is incredibly optimistic, and they set high performance goals for themselves that they would have to achieve within this network. Where we are now is I think we have a model, and I think we have a model that's incredibly intriguing within a portfolio district, and some call it the third way. Tom has called it a hybrid, and I think it truly is an innovation driver in this district, and I think we all hope that other folks will come together with innovative ideas around a new kind of network based on an affinity that works for their communities. And peer-to-peer learning is a huge part of this. And when you hear the 4 leaders talk about the incredible impact they've received by being able to do that within their schools and moving forward, again, that's positive. Still a lot of work to do, and it's around a lot of what Tom was talking about. And I talk about it as connected autonomy, right? These 4 school leaders had every option to proceed to become charter schools, right? It would have been an avenue that's very clear in Denver Public Schools, could have met the quality bar and moved forward with full autonomy. But they were committed to helping us think differently about giving schools and networks more autonomy with the connection to the larger whole that is so important, and they talked about that a lot. And I actually believe deeper in that. I think that connected autonomy is so important in a district like Denver Public Schools, and we need to think about that more as we go forward and continue to innovate and continue to push for flexibilities and autonomy and more decision-making over all kinds of things at our schools. But then how do we stay connected to the larger important issues of equity and access for all our students?
Thanks, Anne. Well, in fact, I think the person or one of the people who coined the term the third way for this kind of innovation is sitting at the end of the table here. Brett Alessi is the co-founder of Empower Schools in Boston, and he flew in last night to join us. Really glad to have you here, Brett. He can really give us some national perspective on this. It was work you were doing with Empower in Springfield and Lawrence that initially inspired Mary to invite you to Colorado. And you've talked a lot about the various use cases for zones nationwide. Could you put for us into context the LLN in the kind of national landscape? It's particularly the sort of good to great model that they're trying to do here compared to the turnaround that happens in a lot of other places.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be in Denver. A lot warmer here than in Boston right now. Yeah, so as our name in PowerSchool suggests, we really believe deeply in giving educators at the school level the ability to make decisions that matter most for the kids, and also giving them obviously the support that they need to make smart decisions and holding them accountable for results. And had the first chance to, as Alan just suggested, pioneer a different kind of model in Springfield, Massachusetts, but the context was pretty different. This was in Springfield. There were a set of schools that have been struggling for a number of years, and the state was threatening to take some action. And so this was a chance to try out a different kind of approach, more of a win-win with the district and the state, to be able to give these schools a better chance. And so I had a chance to do it there first. And one of the features, as is true here in Denver as well, was this majority independent board where you have the superintendent, the mayor, the vice chair of the school board are actually on the board in Denver, as well as 4 folks appointed by the state. So that, I think, provided some real partnership with the district, which I think was really exciting. If you go to Springfield now, I think they really feel proud of the progress they're making because they're, have a seat at the table, which is really exciting. The other piece important for us in Massachusetts, obviously, we're, a strong union state, and had a chance to work pretty closely with the union in Springfield, which was also really exciting. I think they were excited about coming together to give teachers a real voice, and even more of a voice than they've had before. That was really exciting, and that coupled, I think, with the ability for educators at the school level to have more flexibility over resources, to be able to pay, for expanded learning time and pay teachers stipends to do more different things at the school, I think it made it really compelling. And so the union actually voted 92 to 8% in favor of a different kind of contract for the schools in the zone, which is really exciting. I know it's also awesome here in Denver, obviously, that the zone here can accommodate, schools that have unionized teachers as well. So, and I know that some of the schools, like the Green School, for example, really came together really around educator voice. So that was, I think, really exciting. But I think when we brought the structure to Springfield, we didn't think as much about the applications nationally. We just were thinking about trying to solve a problem in Springfield. And so had a chance to meet Mary at a conference kind of serendipitously and learn more about the situation here in Denver. And it's just really exciting. And I mean, a lot of people have been focused on Denver for a long time. As Tom suggested, HBS is writing case study. Lots of people look to Denver as a real leader in terms of portfolio and just overall district performance and doing and trying innovative things. So having a chance to work in that kind of environment, I think, was really exciting. People pay attention. No one can find Springfield on a map, but Denver, is really exciting. A lot of people it gets a lot of attention. So having a chance to come here and just learning a little bit more about the context. And there is this great enabling law that Tom mentioned, the Innovation Schools Act, that hadn't been tested in different kinds of ways. That there was a really exciting school leadership in place already. Tom's been here for 10 years. Prior to him, obviously Bennett had been here for a number of years. The school board was really excited about this, moving in this direction. So I think those kind of elements really helped get me excited about this work. And then obviously meeting the school leaders, certainly Jen and the others who've been involved in this process, and just their vision and passion. They already had a lot of experience with autonomy and flexibility, which is different than the schools in Springfield. Springfield schools were traditional schools. So moving the zone model, they were, had a lot more flexibility, but that was for the first time, right? In Denver, these school leaders had already had a lot of autonomy, just given that they were in Denver and had innovation status, and they were looking to go sort of the next leg, this good to great model that Alan just referred to. So having a chance to think about that, I think, was really exciting, and learning more about their vision and thinking about what we had done in Springfield and thinking some of the lessons learned there could be applicable in a place like Denver got us really excited about the chance to come here. And so I had a chance to partner with Mary and some of the school leaders to help move this work forward.
Thanks. And Brett, just another quick question. In the case study, we go pretty deep into looking at a few of the issues that were negotiated between the district and LLN: school-based budgeting, network governance, and school accountability. What were the underlying issues from your sort of inside and outside perspective? And for the LLN, what were the most important wins, and what were the compromises that the two sides needed to make this happen?
Right. A softball, huh? Yeah, I mean, I definitely think one of the most exciting things for us about the zone structure is that I think it does allow for people to have interesting and exciting conversations in hopefully a productive way. And so I think that's really what happened. And we heard a little bit about from other folks on the board already about some of these things. But yeah, I mean, balancing. I think the districts, I think focus on equity, which obviously is really important, with giving schools autonomy is really tricky. I mean, how, should the schools, elementary schools, pay for things like high school sports, and what does that look like if they're part of the district, right? So I think there are these real tensions, and it's hard to say what's right for Denver. I mean, in Springfield, the schools get 85% of the money, and it's a contract, and it's a 5-year term, and I think that helps for planning purposes. But I don't know, what the right, mix is for Denver. I mean, obviously the school leaders love to have more money and think they can, I think rightfully probably think that they can make smart decisions with that and have more autonomy if they control more of the budget. But I also think they might also underestimate, some of the factors that the district's thinking hard about in terms of these issues that Tom brought up related to equity and that sort of thing. So what the right balance is really, there's no clear-cut answer. And I know that they're still having exciting conversations around this. And I think, the zone has helped to force some of those conversations around the budget piece. But that's certainly one of the things I think that's still, under discussion. And I think a second one, that comes to mind for me is just the length of term of the innovation zone. I mean, right now it's a 3-year term. So last year was their first year. They're partway through their second year now, and next year they're up for renewal. And that just feels to me like maybe it's a little bit too short. I mean, charters have 5 years, for example. So I don't know what the right length of time is, but this works really hard. And so what is the right length of time to really evaluate and look at this as an innovation that is fair for all the parties involved? That's something that might be worth, I think, people considering as we move forward. So those are a couple of things that I just might hit on for folks to keep thinking about. But again, I think it's really exciting that the conversations that people are having, in part, as they are happening on their own already because of the leadership and the board. But I think the zone might have accelerated some of these conversations in hopefully a productive way to be able to keep pushing the district forward.
Thanks, Brett. We'll sort of transition a little bit now into what's going on today with LLN. And Jess, who's been sitting here patiently and quietly, I'm going to ask you the first question. Okay. Jess came to Denver from Houston, where she was working with Yes Prep, a network of high-performing charter schools there. And she showed up in October of 2016 in the first year of implementation of LLN, so it was definitely being thrown into the deep end. What were your top priorities when you got there, and what would you say they are today, and how have they changed? And particularly, how has your relationship with the principals and DPS changed from that when you arrived to now?
Yeah. So I think the top priorities, everybody had really big ideas and this great idea to empower school leaders, but with it came this high level of accountability that we really want to make sure was in place. And so all the schools in the zone committed to moving one band up in the SPF over 3 years, or if they were blue and green, maintaining that band as long as they were above 70% in green. So for some of the schools, that's a really big goal. And so trying to figure out what are going to be the structures that allow schools to assess progress and get there. And so we have an internal process doing school reviews where we go to each school twice a year, a non-evaluated review, bring in other experts, so other educators, but experts in the schools, whatever the niche of their program is, and have them come in and spend a day getting to know teachers, students, the administrators, the program, and give that feedback to the leaders. And so the very first thing I did really was work on how do we get these structures in place so that we can meet the accountability commitment to the district and to ourselves. I think also there was just a lot that was really undefined. With the state approving the innovation zone late in the summer, all these school leaders started. I came in October, school had already started. So trying to build relationships with the district, try to figure out what are these communication structures that we're going to have. I'm looking at Jen Holiday a lot of time in her office thinking about how do I get all the information I need. One of the structures we opted out of was the instructional superintendent structure, and that's usually a main flow of information to the schools comes from that role. And so how are we going to get all that information to the schools and information back to the district, so making sure we're meeting all the compliance needs. that are there. I think, as we've transitioned to this year, some of those systems are in place and some we're still refining. We learned a lot in our first year of, how we get access to systems and make sure that flow of information goes both ways. I think, obviously I had a year of trying to get to know each school really well and know the leaders really well. And so, ultimately I'm their evaluator, and that's an interesting dynamic to shift for a leader. And so building those relationships, now that side of it is all much smoother for me. I know the schools really well. I can advocate for them better. I can, I think both of us are more comfortable with the evaluation role and how that works with the new executive coaching that we brought in. So, we're definitely still refining, but I think we've gotten to a more comfortable place.
What would you say have been the biggest learnings for the year for you as you've kind of gotten your feet on the ground here, and also for the LLN as a whole, and from your observation, learning to the district as well?
I think one of the things that maybe was most surprising to me was this tension between, what really excited me about the zone was the ability to come in and empower leaders. I think all of us in this room are concerned about, leader retention and teacher retention, and how do we get people to stay in these roles longer. And so I really saw the zone as a unique way to really empower leaders and hopefully affect that, but also address the unique needs of communities. Every community in Denver is different, and what the school needs is different. And so this was a way to give that autonomy to the school leaders, empower them to do what's right for the community. And so I was really excited about that. The tension that, that I was probably a little unaware of walking into the room is that conflict of taking that control, in some ways from the district to give it to leaders. It takes a lot of trust in your leaders, which thankfully Tom and Ann and everyone at this table has, but it's that causes a lot of tension of what is that right balance of addressing the community needs and empowering leaders, but also, having them be district schools, and the district is accountable to the state for those schools, and how do we balance that?
And finally, do you think that LLN needs to expand in order to be viable? There are 4 schools, didn't expand in its second year or after its first year, and so now what's next?
I think long-term we do need to expand, I think for multiple reasons. So I think one, a community of practice, having 4 schools is not as great as having 8 schools. And when you're talking about schools that are innovating and really trying to address the unique needs of their community, having a larger community that we can really share with will both impact those schools, but also the schools within the district that we also try to collaborate with. I think from a zone perspective, the services we can provide to the schools to try to take off some of the lift on things like data analysis and how the coaching structure works in these school review processes would be better if we have more schools. So I think that's all true. I think from an economic standpoint, for the zone to provide all those services, it also makes sense to have probably 8 to 10 schools. But we also want to make sure that that we're maintaining all of our commitments through that, so we don't want to grow too fast, too soon. We want it to be the right mix, the right fit of schools.
Thanks. Jen, as a school leader, don't drink that water yet. You had about, I think it was $158,000 more than you would have had, and you recaptured some services from the district and you opted out of others. How did you redirect the funds that came to you that you wouldn't have had otherwise? And how did what impact did that have on the school and the students? And was there anything on the other side noticeably missing as LLN launched and you didn't have the supports of the sort of traditional instructional superintendent process that you had to then figure out how to backfill?
Yeah, so it took a little while for the funding to get loaded. So in our first year, we didn't really know, like any of us at this table knew what the money was going to look like when we got it. Our first year, we used it for an internal guest teacher, which is something that Cole had really struggled with, is losing instructional time when a teacher was out for any reason. And then building back up our intervention teachers, knowing that our school had lost enrollment. Our enrollment had gone down in the near Northeast. So that was one of the areas we had really plugged in that really shored up some things for Cole in that first year that we did. This year, we used it far more intentionally to bring in a partnership with Child Trauma Academy, which is national group working on trauma-informed education, and has been this really impactful training. Again, looking at the data of Cole and then re-looking at our math. So those were the two areas, like thinking of how we use the money each year. You could see it evolve to get more targeted based on data and just stronger. Absolutely, that first year, we missed a ton. I've probably missed 800 emails. Like there would be things where people are like, "Are you coming?" And I was like, "To what?" So I think it was that information cycle. I mean, it was great. I had my inbox was magical, but I missed some things. And as the time went on, it was one of the interesting things with DPS. Like we would say, "Hey, can we do this?" And then somebody downtown would be like, "Hey, I don't know if you can do that." And then we both kind of sit there and they're like, "Well, we'll come over." And so I think that was one of the tensions, and one of the things that we had to work out is how do we figure out what we really need and what we're really opting out of. And that first year we didn't know. I mean, I think we're still learning. And that's the coolest part about it being really different schools. What Cole opted out of and what Cole needs is vastly different than what C3 needs. And it's been really great to be able to, as a school leader, say, this is good for my kids. This is what my students need. And Julia is able to say, this is important for me to run my school. I need this part. And it doesn't have to be the same. I think that is the hardest thing in education for all of us, which is always fascinating to me, is that we know we all need different things. And then to try to find the way to get different systems to different schools is always.
And Jen, you said at the outset, and I've heard you say it many, many times, that you are most impactful when you are in your building. I assume that this actually allowed you to spend more time in your building. I'm interested in how that made a difference and what you're able to do differently having more time in your building.
So I'm not in my building right now, which I fully honor. But it does. So we high-five 500 kids every morning. That's an impactful thing. See every one of my students as they walk into my building. When I'm there, I know what's happening. I know if my fourth grade teacher planned today. I know if she's following through on the feedback we had about pausing. I don't know right now if she's doing that. I believe she is because I trust in the work, but I don't know. When you are in the building with the kids, that's where that happens. And one of the things that we have framed in the unifying thing of the 4 leaders is we are in service of students. That is our whole job. And if you're not in front of the students, not serving them well. So the best part of in the zone, and one of the things that I found the most impactful, is my schedule is driven by my school. So it has been, while I say a year of yes, of people saying like, yes, we will try this crazy thing, it has also allowed me to say no. So people be like, hey, we're going to hold this meeting. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not coming to that. And I can't just say it to be bratty. I can't just say, I don't do that. But if I'm like, no, we have this, we have access testing, or I have a 3rd grade teacher out and I need to be in the building because I don't know who our guest teacher is. I'm able to say no in a way that feels really transparent and super supportive. I know my building, and the feedback we've gotten from our teachers is that they know their principal is there every day, and they know when I'm gone, it's for a really good reason, and it's for the school.
Thanks. And finally, really quickly, one of the other things that LLN made available was some executive coaching that you get, that the other leaders get, that isn't evaluative. So it's separated from that what can sometimes feel a little bit conflictual. What did you and your coach focus on, and what's had the most impact on you as a leader of that whole process?
My coach is actually here. It's not like she just follows me around, but she is she's currently here. And I think the difference is, and especially talking to instructional superintendents in DPS, everyone wants principals to get better. Like, there's no one who works in schools who doesn't want anything more than their leaders and students to get better. The great thing about having a coach was sometimes I would dog and pony show it when, like Tom would come and I'm like, you guys, everyone stay in your seat. Like, we would know you would come. Everyone was super nervous, because you really want to impress your boss. Like, you want them to think you're doing a really good job. to get better, you have to be able to admit the gap. You have to be able to say, like, to truly get better, you have to name what you're not good at. That is an incredibly scary, vulnerable position to be in, to say, I really excel right here, and then to lift up the carpet and be like, but I hide this because I'm not good at it. With my coach, there's no hiding. Like, I literally had to say, I have to get better here, and I had to name what I really had to get better at. Not the interview question where you're like, I just care too much. You know, like, you really had to say, like, I am bad at this. And for everyone in this room, you know that's a horrible thing to have to say. Because you, A, have to deeply know yourself. And when you're a school leader, if you're not good at something, that means you are letting students down in some aspect. And to be able to name that transparently was incredibly hard. And my coach was able to sit with me, and she's like, and I'm like, I think I'm bad at this. And she goes, really? That's what you think you're bad at? And I was like, no, I'm bad at this. And so for a year, it has been a deep friendship. I have called her late at night, upset about scores. She knows that I'm going to freak out at different times of year over different things. She knows that I'm deeply unorganized. So she's like, what time are you leaving your house to get to the panel today? All of these things. But it has built me up in a transparency of where I am weak. And that is something that if we really want leaders to get better, we want to keep people in buildings. If we're really looking at why principals leave, it is because we know we have gaps. And in order to fill those gaps, you have to name them. They don't get fixed in a year. I am marginally more organized. But the places that I got better at, that Amy and I really worked on, I'm better at. My staff this year, in their feedback to me, that's where they named I got better. And so that was a really powerful thing for me, to be able to name a weakness, have somebody really tear into me for a year, being like, God, you're really bad at this, and then get better. So that's where the executive coaching, I think, has been the most powerful.
Thanks. What I knew would happen is happening, which is that time is flying by and there's so much more to ask. Are there questions from the audience? I want to make sure we get to some of those. While we're gathering those, let me just ask really quickly for Tom and Ann, what are the LLN innovations that you've seen that you think have the most potential to have a real impact on the district? Tom, I know you've talked about the approach to the school reviews, and then also the budgeting model that was rolled out for LLN that may be expanding to other schools or is expanding. If you could both talk a little bit about where you see LLN having the biggest impact.
Sure. So I think a number of areas. So one is this real emphasis on peer-to-peer learning, and it's something I think that we really respect and admire, the thoughtfulness and the intentionality around that peer-to-peer learning. And it's something I think that we care deeply about. It's our networks and why we have networks and small networks of principals as well. We also have a very strong emphasis on executive coaching for our school leaders for all the reasons that Jen mentioned. But I think the intentionality of their structures around peer-to-peer learning, I think, are very powerful. Of principals really taking that initiative to say in school leaders of, we're responsible for our own learning. We're going to be very strong peer-to-peer co-learners and sharers, at times critics, right, of each other's through your school review process. And that's something I think that I think is a very powerful model, and I'd like to see us do more of that model around peer-to-peer. I think their teacher leader advisory council. We've been, I think, very proud of the really innovative work we've done around teacher leaders. We have by far the strongest and largest teacher leadership program in the country. Some of that was we learned from schools like the Green School, which was one of the real innovators around teacher leadership. Right, that was an example where we saw a real innovation at the school level that we thought, geez, that's really working there. How can we, expand that? That's an example of how you not just say how you have it in one school, but how you learn and spread innovations across more schools. So I think we have really strong teacher leadership structures in our schools. We've got a good district-wide teacher leader advisory council. What we don't have at the network level is what LLN has. The network level is this teacher leader advisory council at the network level. And I think that's very powerful. We heard from a couple of your guys' teachers on that last week. So that's another example, I think, of really, again, how do you, above all, and to use Anne's term of connected autonomy, right? How do you make sure schools is the unit of change, and you're setting up intentional learning structures where schools learn from each other, right? Our vision of autonomy is not you go off and sit on an isolated island. We'll deliver the books and kids in August and come back in May and see if you still alive and kids learned anything, right? That learning is so important in these intentional structures of how teachers, of how school leaders learn from each other, share knowledge, share innovation, share best practices, don't have to be put in the position of reinventing the wheel, right? That comes to your network structure, right? How do you have really effective and trusting networks? And again, I think there's a lot that our network structure can learn from the shared learning that the LLN folks have been very intentional about in setting up their shared learning structures within their network.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things. Tom did a really good job of naming some of the learnings. I think the concept of evolving, call it a network, and our networks currently take a lot of shapes and forms, whether it's a CMO, whether it's our traditional network within DPS. And the question is, what does that structure look like to be most productive for all the things that Jen has talked about, and Brett and Mary, and Jess and Tom, for our schools? And what are the affinities that can make a network incredibly powerful? The other thing which I mentioned earlier, which I think we as a governance team with Tom have been thinking deeply about, is the evolution of the connected part, the central, the supports, the folks that work on empowering school leaders and schools to do best for our kids. And we're learning more and more every day. I think we believe we have a long way to go on that. And it's really interesting because folks talk about devolving central. I actually think it's evolving central. One that's a little more positive, don't you think? But it's really about the incredible role that very talented people who work at the district can play in truly making, again, what the LLN has taught us, the empowerment of not only schools at a school level, but a connectivity for whatever reason among schools where they drive each other. So I think we as a board see that kind of challenge to the district as a really positive, tension-filled, messy discussion that is so important. And I think that's the discussion we're engaged in. And I'm so thankful for the leadership at the district for really engaging in this, my colleagues on the board for pushing toward this, and for Tom's leadership. But most importantly, these incredible school leaders have driven us to a point that I think is really exciting, and I don't think we let go of this. And, a call for zones, allowing other folks to come together with the same kind of talent and energy, I think is really exciting and a real possibility to get out of the very good but incremental improvement that we're seeing.
Thanks, Anne. I want to make sure we get a little bit to the future, but I do want to ask a couple of questions from the audience, and it's hard to choose which ones. Let me ask this one. Is DPS hiring leaders who have the skills to open more LLN-type schools, and are schools of education turning out leaders who can lead this way? I would kick that out to anybody who wants to take a chance at it.
I'm happy to. Sure. Absolutely. And I think it's one of the things that we really have put a tremendous amount of investment in, which is really helping investing in our leaders. And partly because if you ask teachers what's the most important factor of a teacher deciding to come to school or stay at a school, it's the quality of support that they get from their leader. It's the quality of the culture that their leader has such an important a role in playing. That's why we've invested, one of the reasons we've invested so much in teacher leadership, to give our teachers more support, develop a strong leadership pipeline. Last year, in addition to the LLN, we had 2 we called IMOs, Innovation Management Organizations, where it's something, again, we learned from our principals, something we learned from effective charge, how we replicate. So last year, we had our Beacon network with 2 schools, we had the McAuliffe network with 2 schools. Next year, we'll add 2 more, right? We'll add the Montbello Children's Network, we'll add the Northwest Denver Middle School Network, in each case with an extremely talented executive principal now, not just leaving their school to take on a school, but managing 2 schools. We put out a couple weeks ago our call for quality new innovation zones. We're interested in seeing that. We're working with Empower and others, and Susana Cordova's leadership in this has been terrific, and Debbie Harity's leadership around helping develop our leaders, both school leaders, instructional superintendents, around leadership skills they need to run strong schools and strong networks. And there's lots of growing and lots of learning that we have to do, and I think we have the strongest school leaders in the country. I think as we look at the quality of our school leaders and our assistant principals, I think they're the strongest of any district in the country. And I think, again, that's a real credit to the people who work in DPS. And I think obviously you're seeing examples here today with Jen and Julia and Zach and Frank and others. And I think they would speak to as well their colleagues. They're an extraordinary group of leaders in whom we, again, lots of learning and lots of growing to do. But I'm very confident in it.
I think DPS is full of brilliant principals. I think it's the way these things happen is trust. We have that, we have leadership that trusts us. We have a board that trusts us. We have a lot of backup. So while I think the 4 of us are great, I don't think we're totally unique in Denver. I think there's innovations happening all over.
Okay, thanks. Looking forward, I'm curious about, and this is really for Mary, Tom, and then anybody else who wants to take it on. What would you say are the remaining areas of tension, and how are the 2 sides working to resolve them?
That one's.
So I think it's maybe, again, all these ideas are forming what you could do with a zone. And so Brett referenced this a little bit, I think, in the beginning. So I think it is that vision of what the environment around DPS could look like to support zones. And, I think obviously a lot about the LLN, but I do with Portfolio releasing and DPS releasing a call for quality zones. I think this is a really interesting piece. And so I want to give a little kind of analogy that I've thought about a lot in the last year around the LLN. But when I bought my first house in Northwest Denver, I decided to put in a garden. I didn't know anything about gardening. Both of my step-parents were incredible gardeners, and I decided to do xeriscaping. So I put in all these plants that needed almost no water, and they didn't die, and it was amazing, and it was incredibly cool. And then I went home to North Carolina, and my stepfather, who was an incredible gardener, had some of the same exact plants in his garden, but it was in this humid climate, and they were beautiful and enormous and huge. And he wasn't watering them either, but what happened went from something just surviving to really thriving. And so I think a lot about what DPS could do now, whether it's on a financial model that is, again, it's not giving money to the LLN schools, it's actually letting them retain their per pupil dollars. It is looking at things in just a slightly different way that's still very much based on equity in district schools that I think could actually make the LLN and future zones really transformational.
Any thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, I think that we will continue to learn and grow and evolve. And I just think, Brett made the really important point about time, which is innovations do take time. And I think it's important. And with anything, there is a level of accountability. Well, of course there should be in performance. And, we will come back next year. But again, I don't think any of us expected, and to Mary's point, and probably to your stepfather's point, those plants took a few years to grow. This is going to take time, and we are going to learn, and we are going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. LN's going to make mistakes, and I think the most important thing is that we need to learn from them. I really am grateful to the work that Jess and Jen Holiday have really done in digging in as executive directors to say, and chiefs of their respective how does all this work operationally, right? That when you have, when you look at the financial questions, they're not easy. We have a lot of, when you talk about the $158,000 additional dollars, some of that we have insurance pools of money, for example, called class size relief, where a school has 34 kids in second grade. They don't have enough money for 2 teachers. Well, 34 kids, you can't want a second grade class, 34 kids. We subsidize them, right? Should LN be in or out of that subsidy system, right? These are, some of the questions. LN chose to be out, respect that. They took the money. Schools that are in, they get the money. So I do think operationally going forward.
Tom, can I just ask a quick? I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm really interested. So let's say LLN does expand to 8 or 10 or 12 schools. Yeah. That has a bigger implication for those kinds of questions. How do you deal with that?
I don't. Again, I think you deal with it in the exact same fashion, which is, ultimately, I think it's really important that the district-run support services are there for one reason: support. And I think one of the really important things in the relationship with LLN is if LLN feels they can do it better, hallelujah, right? If they can come up with new models and better models of supporting, right? I think they should very much have that option to do that in Pioneer. Maybe some will better, maybe some will not so better, but we'll learn from that. So I don't, it's a little bit also with some districts, right? Have this feel that charter schools are a huge problem because they take money away from the district-run schools. I guess that we've come at it very differently, which is money follows the kid, and if the kid's in a school, the money should follow the kid, and we should work collaboratively to have the best support. So I don't think whether LN's 4 schools or 8 schools or whether there's one innovation zone or 10, right? Next year, all 4 of our IMOs will have, also have a devolved funding model. So it won't just be the 4 LLN schools. It'll be the 8 other IMO schools. Our innovation schools have another additional, have a funding model that's not quite as extensive, but is also devolved. So again, I really think it's a learning experience for us, and I think it's, some very interesting questions, both about equity, but also around this question of, how do you make your support services the best support services possible? And if they're not support services, we shouldn't be having them.
Another question from the audience, and this is probably, again, mostly for Tom and Ann, but anybody should weigh in. DPS now has multiple governance models: traditional schools, charters, innovation schools, zone schools. Do the panelists see these models as a means to a single district model unified around the principle of autonomy, innovation, and accountability, or will DPS continue to be an amalgam of schools governed in various ways? Simple question.
I have a simple answer. I don't know. And that's part of moving forward. And it's a great question, and I guess my response is, it's about the systems and the networks that schools thrive in. And so I don't want to be prescriptive on, we have found the answer, and this is exactly the kind of network that all our schools will exist in, because then we start to go through some of the same challenges that we're currently going through. And so I think the idea of allowing networks to exist in the kind of framework, so whether it's an IMO, whether it is a zone, whether it is a CMO, whether it's a zone created by folks within the district, if it best serves, and Jen said this so well, if she can best serve the kids in her school and be provided the kind of supports and coaching and resources so she can be the best principal for the kids at Cole, that's what drives that. So I don't think it's trying to figure out the perfect model. It's trying to create environments where our schools can thrive and grow and provide great learning spaces for our kids so they can grow and their outcomes can improve.
And I'll say, just adding to that in a bit of a plea, which is, I think for the foreseeable future, right, we will be a mixed governance model, and we'll learn in hallelujah. And I think one of the ways we've been able to be a mixed governance model in a way that few other places have been able to be, is really embracing the both and, right? Which is, we think having great charter schools helps make our district-run schools better, right? We think having great models in the LLN will help us all learn. We think good things we do in district-run side will help the LLN, will help our charter schools. And this is a bit of a plea in a world which increasingly wants to be an either-or world, which posits there's always a conflict. That if LLN is good, then elementary school network in Northwest has to be bad. I just totally disagree with that. And believe very strongly in a both-and world where we can embrace really strong district-run schools, where we can embrace terrific innovative models like LLN, where we can embrace terrific charter schools. And so often the dialogue in the public is either or. It's a conflict. If you have this is good, this must be bad. And I think, frankly, that's very harmful. And I think that's why so many other cities have not been able to do what we've done, because they're locked into that conflict. They're locked into that either-or mentality. They're locked into that us versus them mentality. And this is a plea at a time, and we hear that from our public, right? We hear from our public often that conflict gets played out. And in a time where our politics as a community, as a country, are pushing more to the right and more to the left, and those of us who think we're in the center feel we're increasingly lonely, it's a real plea for a both-and world to celebrate the emergence of the LLN and what it represents, to celebrate the great things that are going on in district-run schools, to celebrate the great things that are going on in charter schools, and for all of us to work together and learn together.
Thanks. I wanted to ask one more question, but we're at 9, so do we need to stop? Yeah. Well, that was a great way to end. So, Tom, thanks so much for those inspiring words. Thanks, everybody, so much. Thanks to our panel. Thanks to the Gates Family Foundation.
All right, before you all scatter, just a couple of quick announcements. First of all, thank you, Alan, for helping us capture all this and try to understand this experience and what we learned from it. Thank you again to the amazing panel, not only for this morning, but really for what all of you contribute and the unbelievable commitment you clearly share to serve kids. It's inspiring, so thank you. Where's Paul? Thanks to you, Denver, again for having us. We appreciate it. Thank you, Paul. Just a quick plug for something to put on your radar. On April 20th at the Museum of Nature and Science, we're going to host another event that is focused on kind of the evolution of DPS over recent years and what lies ahead. And so it's an event called Portfolio Next, and it's going to feature the superintendent and also his predecessor, Michael Bennett, will be with us. And it's a chance just to both unpack recent history and think about what that future can look like. And also a chance to sort of celebrate the launch of Blue School Partners. Some of you folks know about them. Another organization that is kind of taking on the mission of trying to focus on how do we continue to create excellent schools long-term here in Denver. So you'll all get information about this, but just plant the seed for April 20th, and there'll be more information soon. Thank you again. It's an amazing room full of people. Thank you for all being here.
Thanks for coming.